Welcome back to D.R.S. Hakim's Wealth Lessons. Whether you are joining us for the first time or you have been following this series from the very beginning, we are truly honored to have you with us. These inspiring, transformative lessons are designed to help you transform your behavior, strengthen your attitude, develop greater discipline, and cultivate the qualities necessary to earn, manage, multiply, and preserve lasting wealth. Today, Professor Hakim continues our Behavioral Wealth Dynamics series. Persistence equals success. Keep moving when progress becomes difficult. In this lesson, Professor Hakim will examine why persistence is so important in these moments, and how continuing with discipline, patience, adaptability, and sound judgment can make a meaningful difference in the pursuit of success. As always, before we give the floor to Professor Hakim, let's review the questions submitted by 3 of our global viewers. Our first question comes from D.R.S. in Minneapolis, Minnesota. D.R.S. asks, Professor Hakim, how do I know whether I am giving up too early or whether I am wisely recognizing that something is not working? Our second question comes from Nadia in Sarajevo, Bosnia. Nadia asks, D.R.S. Hakim, how can I remain persistent when repeated rejection starts affecting the way I see myself? And our final question comes from Tane in Suva, Fiji. Tane asks, D.R.S. Hakim, does persistence mean that I should keep working even when I am mentally exhausted? Thank you, D.R.S., Nadia, and Tane, for these thoughtful questions. Professor Hakim will address each of them later in today's lesson. And to everyone watching around the world, we encourage you to continue submitting your questions. Your question may address something many others are experiencing, and the answer may ultimately benefit viewers across the globe. And now, without further delay, please join me in welcoming D.R.S. Hakim.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everyone joining us from around the world. In our previous lesson, The Dynamics of Decisiveness, Stop Hesitating and Start Making Better Decisions, we examined the importance of evaluating information, reaching responsible conclusions, and refusing to remain unnecessarily trapped between alternatives. We learned that careful evaluation must eventually become a decision, and a responsible decision must eventually become action. Today, we move naturally into what happens after that action has begun, because making a good decision and taking the first step do not guarantee that everything that follows will be easy. Today's lesson is titled, Persistence equals Success. Keep moving when progress becomes difficult. Persistence is the disciplined continuation of purposeful effort despite difficulty, delay, temporary disappointment, resistance, rejection, or results that may be slower than expected. I emphasize the words disciplined and purposeful because persistence should never be confused with blindly repeating something that clearly does not work. Persistence does not mean refusing to learn, ignoring evidence, or remaining attached to an ineffective method simply because you have already invested time, money, and energy into it. Mature persistence means remaining committed to a worthwhile objective while being intelligent enough to adjust the method when credible evidence demonstrates that an adjustment is necessary. Many people can begin something when excitement is high. A new business is exciting. A new educational pursuit can be exciting. A new financial objective can be exciting. During the beginning, enthusiasm can make effort feel relatively easy, but eventually enthusiasm encounters the ordinary demands of achievement. There are responsibilities that must be completed when you do not feel like completing them, problems that must be solved when you would rather avoid them, skills that must be developed repeatedly, and periods when you may work diligently without receiving immediate evidence that your effort is producing the results you expected. This is where persistence becomes essential. Anyone can be enthusiastic for a short period of time. The greater test is whether you can remain disciplined when enthusiasm is no longer carrying you. Persistence is closely connected with discipline because human emotions naturally fluctuate. If you work only when you feel inspired, save only when saving feels convenient, study only when studying feels exciting, or operate your business only when circumstances are comfortable, your behavior will continually fluctuate with your emotions. Discipline gives persistent structure. It allows you to continue performing necessary actions because those actions remain connected to an objective you have already determined is worthwhile. You are no longer asking yourself every morning whether you feel like pursuing the objective. You have established standards and responsibilities that continue even when your emotional state changes. However, we must establish an important distinction. Persistence is not the refusal to change direction. Persistence is the refusal to abandon a worthwhile objective merely because the path toward it requires more effort or an adjustment. You may need to change your strategy, schedule, pricing, marketing, communication, expectations, business model, or timetable. The objective and the method are not necessarily the same thing. A mature person understands that remaining committed to an objective does not require remaining permanently attached to the first strategy used to pursue it. This distinction is particularly important in entrepreneurial pursuits because entrepreneurship contains uncertainty. A business plan includes informed assumptions about customers, costs, demand, competition, operations, and value creation. Once the business encounters the marketplace, reality begins testing those assumptions. Some will be confirmed, and others will require revision. An entrepreneur who interprets every difficulty as evidence that the entire objective should be abandoned may never remain with anything long enough to develop it. On the other hand, an entrepreneur who refuses to respond to evidence may continue to lose resources due to stubbornness, pride, or a lack of strategic foresight. Persistence must therefore operate together with observation, judgment, discipline, patience, and adaptation. Consider a woman who has spent years preparing specialty sauces for her family and community using recipes that have been passed through several generations. Friends and relatives repeatedly tell her that the sauces are exceptional, and after careful consideration, she decides to transform that ability into a legitimate commercial enterprise. She researches food production requirements, works with an appropriately licensed facility, develops professional packaging, establishes relationships with suppliers, calculates her production costs, and begins producing a small line of shelf-stable specialty sauces. She has invested money, time, creativity, and considerable effort, and naturally she hopes that retailers will immediately recognize the quality of what she has created. When she begins approaching independent grocery stores and specialty retailers, however, reality does not match her expectations. Several buyers decline to carry an unfamiliar brand. Some enjoy the product but tell her that the packaging does not clearly communicate what makes it different from the many other sauces already occupying their shelves. Other retailers believe the price is too high for a company the customers do not recognize. A few tell her to return when she can demonstrate stronger sales. After weeks become months, rejection begins affecting her confidence. She starts wondering whether the business was a mistake. This is where persistence becomes meaningful. She could abandon the company and conclude that rejection proves there is no market for the product. She could also become defensive and insist that nothing needs to change because everyone she knows enjoys the sauces. Neither response demonstrates mature persistence. Instead, she decides to investigate the difference between what she originally believed and what the marketplace is actually telling her. She begins noticing something important. When customers are given an opportunity to sample the sauces, many purchase them, and some later return and purchase them again. Yet customers who simply encounter the bottles on a shelf often pass by without understanding what makes them distinctive. This suggests that the product itself may not be the primary problem. The way the product is being presented may be limiting its performance. Rather than abandoning the business, she adjusts her strategy. She redesigns portions of the packaging so customers can more quickly understand the product's distinguishing qualities. She organizes sampling events with several cooperative retailers and begins selling directly to consumers online, where she can gather better information about customer preferences. Instead of attempting to promote every variety equally, she studies purchasing patterns and discovers that 3 flavors consistently generate stronger repeat sales than the others. She concentrates production and marketing around those products. She also stops attempting to enter dozens of stores simultaneously. Instead, she focuses on a smaller number of retailers where she can build relationships, monitor sales, understand customer behavior, and demonstrate that the products can generate repeat purchases. Slowly, those stores begin reordering. Customers recommend the sauces to others. Online purchases increase. She develops a sales history that she did not possess when she originally approached larger retailers. Months later, she approaches larger buyers again, but this time the conversation is different. She is no longer simply saying, "I believe people will purchase my products." she can present actual sales information, repeat purchase patterns, customer responses, and evidence identifying which products perform most consistently. The rejection she originally experienced has not disappeared from her history. It has become part of the education that helped improve the company. Notice what persistence looked like in this woman's entrepreneurial pursuit. She did not merely continue doing exactly the same thing for a longer period. She continued learning. She remained committed enough to the objective to allow reality to educate her. Every rejection was not automatically interpreted as failure, nor was every criticism automatically accepted as truth. She looked for patterns, tested changes, measured results, preserved what worked, and modified what did not. That is disciplined persistence. Sometimes the obstacle is not telling you to stop. Sometimes the obstacle is revealing what you must improve. In our previous lesson, we discussed the Anterior Cingulate Cortex, commonly abbreviated as the ACC, in connection with difficult decisions, conflict, discrepancies, and behavioral adjustment. At this time, I would like to briefly return to the ACC while introducing another region of the cingulate cortex, the Posterior Cingulate Cortex, commonly abbreviated as the PCC. The cingulate cortex lies along the medial or inner surface of the cerebral hemispheres. The ACC is located toward the anterior or forward portion of the cingulate cortex, while the PCC lies farther posteriorly toward the rear. These regions participate in larger networks throughout the brain and should not be thought of as isolated switches controlling individual behaviors. The ACC is associated with processes that include monitoring conflict and errors, evaluating effort, and helping signal when additional attention or behavioral adjustment may be necessary. This becomes relevant to persistence because continuing toward an objective requires us to recognize when our effort is productive and when something within the strategy requires correction. If the results we expected and the results we are actually receiving continually differ, persistence should not cause us to ignore that discrepancy. We should examine it. The PCC, which we are introducing in this lesson, is an important component of the brain's default mode network. It participates in internally directed mental processes and is associated with functions that include self-referential processing and autobiographical memory. This becomes particularly interesting when we discuss persistence because a setback does not exist only as an external event. Human beings also interpret what happens to them and construct internal narratives about what those experiences mean. Suppose an entrepreneur presents a proposal and receives a rejection. Externally, the event is relatively simple. One proposal was rejected. Internally, however, the individual may begin saying, "Maybe I am not capable. Things never work for me. Perhaps I was foolish for trying. Maybe successful people possess something I do not possess." The external event has now become attached to a much larger internal story. This gives us a useful contrast between the ACC and PCC. One question following a setback should be, what does the evidence tell me needs to change? That relates well to the monitoring and adjustment processes associated with the ACC. Another question is, what am I telling myself this experience means about me? That connects more closely with the internally oriented and self-referential processing associated with networks involving the PCC. These two questions are extremely important for persistence. If you ignore external evidence, you may continue using an ineffective strategy. But if you allow every setback to become a destructive story about who you are, you may abandon a worthwhile objective prematurely. Therefore, when you encounter difficulty, examine both. What is this experience teaching me about my strategy? And how do I perceive myself due to this experience? Persistence itself does not reside in either the ACC or the PCC. Human behavior emerges from complex interactions among many brain systems. Nevertheless, understanding this contrast gives us a useful neuroscientific framework for recognizing that persistence involves both responding intelligently to external information and becoming aware of the internal meaning we assign to our experiences. A temporary setback is an event. It should not automatically become an identity. There is an enormous difference between saying, "This strategy failed," and saying, "I am a failure." The first statement describes an outcome that can be examined, understood, and possibly corrected. The second transforms an outcome into a judgment about the entire person. If a marketing campaign fails, examine the campaign. If customers reject a product, determine why. If a proposal is declined, investigate the proposal. If a financial strategy produces disappointing results, examine the assumptions and decisions that produce those results. Turn experience into information. Do not allow one disappointing chapter to write the title of the entire book. At the same time, persistence does not require artificial optimism. You do not need to pretend that rejection does not hurt, that losing money is enjoyable, or that difficulty does not create frustration. Acknowledge what happened accurately. Then ask what the experience can teach you. Emotional honesty and persistence can coexist. One reason people abandon worthwhile objectives is that they measure progress only by the final result. If the company has not reached the ultimate revenue target, they conclude that nothing meaningful has happened. If a financial account has not reached its ultimate objective, they disregard every disciplined contribution that has already improved their position. This creates an inaccurate perception because meaningful advancement frequently occurs in stages before the company becomes stable and profitable. Persistence also requires a healthy relationship between patience and urgency. These qualities may initially appear contradictory, but they can coexist. Be patient with the process while remaining urgent about your responsibilities. Patience does not mean inactivity. You should understand that establishing a reputable company requires years. While still responding to today's customers immediately, you may recognize that accumulating wealth is generally a long-term process. We cause problems when we exchange patience for procrastination, or urgency becomes an excuse for recklessness. Persistence balances the two. You perform what can responsibly be performed today while understanding that some results require time. The fact that an objective requires patience does not give us permission to neglect the actions necessary to reach it. I teach that persistence also connects naturally with triadic alignment. The cranial brain contributes analysis, planning, learning, and the evaluation of evidence. The heart brain concerns values, emotional conviction, and the deeper meaning we associate with an objective. The gut brain represents the visceral dimension of courage, endurance, and our embodied response when difficulty creates uncertainty. When these dimensions become misaligned, persistence becomes more difficult. You may intellectually understand that an objective remains worthwhile while emotionally becoming discouraged. You may feel deeply committed to an objective while the evidence indicates that your method must change. Or you may understand what needs to be done and value the result while continually retreating whenever discomfort appears. Triadic alignment encourages us to examine these tensions rather than allowing one dimension to dictate behavior automatically. Ask yourself, what does the evidence say? What do my principles say? What is my emotional response communicating? And what does responsible action now require? When these questions are considered together, persistence becomes more intelligent and less reactive. Persistence can be weakened by negative acidic toxins or nuts. Thoughts such as, this is taking too long, nothing is working, other people have it easier, I should have succeeded by now, I'll never succeed, or if I were truly capable, this would not be difficult, can gradually erode disciplined effort. These thoughts should be replaced with positive essential nutrients, or PENs, such as patience, resilience, adaptability, disciplined optimism, self-control, courage, consistency, and willingness to learn. Instead of saying, nothing is working, ask, what evidence supports that conclusion? And what is working? Instead of saying, this is taking too long, ask, was my original timetable realistic? Instead of saying, I failed, ask, what did I learn and what should I do differently? PENs do not require us to deny reality. They help us engage reality constructively. Persistence becomes dangerous when it loses strategic focus. Periodically return to the fundamental question, is this objective still worthwhile? Perhaps the answer is yes, but the strategy must change. Perhaps the objective remains valuable, but your timetable was unrealistic. This is where persistence must be distinguished from the sunk cost trap. Time, money, and effort already spent cannot, by themselves, justify additional investment. The better question is, given everything I know today, does continuing from this point remain justified? Sometimes persistence means continuing, sometimes wisdom means adjusting. Occasionally, wisdom means redirecting your resources entirely. The discipline lies in making that determination from evidence and principle rather than exhaustion, pride, embarrassment, or temporary emotion. Before we turn our attention to today's viewer questions, I want you to conduct an honest assessment of your own relationship with persistence. Ask yourself, when progress becomes slower than I expected, do I become discouraged too quickly? Do I distinguish between a bad idea and a failing strategy? Have I ever interpreted a temporary setback as evidence that something was fundamentally wrong with me? Am I measuring my progress objectively, or am I allowing temporary emotions to determine whether I believe I am advancing? Is there something worthwhile that I abandoned prematurely because I expected results faster than the process realistically allowed? And finally, am I continuing something today merely because I have already invested too much to admit that the direction should change? Do not rush through these questions. Persistence is not measured by how stubbornly you can defend an old decision. It is demonstrated by your ability to continue purposeful effort when continuation remains justified, learn from what experience reveals, and adapt intelligently when credible evidence requires change. Throughout the coming week, I encourage you to repeat and apply these 5 affirmations. I remain disciplined when meaningful progress requires time. I use setbacks as information rather than allowing them to define me. I remain committed to worthwhile objectives while adjusting ineffective methods. I measure progress with evidence rather than temporary emotion. With supreme guidance, I persist with patience, wisdom, courage, and sound judgment. Remember that affirmations must eventually become behavior. Saying I am persistent, while repeatedly abandoning necessary responsibilities whenever they become uncomfortable, accomplishes very little. Allow your language to reinforce your intentions, and then allow repeated action to transform those intentions into character. For this week's wealth assignment, identify one worthwhile objective in which your progress has become difficult, disappointing, or slower than expected. Write down the objective and deliberately separate the objective from the method you are currently using to reach it. Ask yourself 3 questions. What is working? What is not working? What evidence supports my answer? Then determine whether your situation requires greater consistency or a different strategy. Those are not the same thing. If the strategy is sound, but your execution has been inconsistent, greater discipline may be necessary. If you have executed consistently and credible evidence demonstrates that the method is ineffective, adjustment may be necessary. Choose one measurable improvement and implement it this week. Do not simply promise yourself that you will try harder. Define precisely what will change. Persistence becomes useful when it is connected to specific behavior. Your assignment is not merely to continue. Your assignment is to continue more intelligently. Now, let us turn our attention to the questions Sarah introduced at the beginning of today's lesson. D.R.S. inquires, Professor Hakim, how do I know whether I am giving up too early or whether I am wisely recognizing that something is not working? Darius, thank you for this important question. Begin by separating your objective from your strategy. People frequently abandon an objective because one strategy failed. Suppose your objective is to establish a profitable service business, but the particular marketing approach you selected has produced almost no customers. The failure of that marketing strategy does not automatically demonstrate that the business objective is impossible. It demonstrates that something about the current approach deserves examination. Ask whether credible evidence exists that people value what you are offering. Are some customers purchasing? Are they satisfied? Do they return? Do they refer others? Does the underlying problem you are attempting to solve actually exist? If evidence suggests that genuine value exists, but your pricing, positioning, distribution, or communication is weak, adjustment may be more appropriate than abandonment. You should also determine whether you have given the strategy a fair and measurable opportunity to work. Some people declare something unsuccessful after attempting it only a few times, while others continue for years without establishing any objective measurement at all. Then ask yourself an especially revealing question. If I had not already invested anything into this idea, and I were evaluating it today with everything I now know, would I still choose to pursue it? That question can help distinguish disciplined persistence from attachment to sunk costs. Darius, persistence is not demonstrated simply by refusing to stop. It is demonstrated by remaining committed to worthwhile advancement, while possessing enough intellectual honesty to respond appropriately to evidence. If the objective remains worthwhile but the method is failing, change the method. If the evidence demonstrates that the idea itself is no longer worthwhile, then redirect your resources. Nadia questions, D.R.S. Hakim, how can I remain persistent when repeated rejection starts affecting the way I see myself? Nadia, this is an excellent question, and it connects directly with our introduction of the Posterior Cingulate Cortex, or PCC, and our discussion of internally directed and self-referential processing. Human beings do not experience rejection merely as neutral information. We interpret it. One rejection can become connected with memories of previous disappointments, fears concerning our abilities, and assumptions about what may happen in the future. Before long, the cranial brain, heart brain, and the gut brain can transform the statement, "They rejected my proposal," into the much broader conclusion, "Nobody will ever accept my ideas." You must learn to separate the event from your identity. If someone rejects your proposal, then the proposal was rejected. Determine why if useful information is available. Perhaps the timing was inappropriate. Perhaps the presentation was weak. Perhaps the price did not correspond with the perceived value. Perhaps that particular individual or organization genuinely had no need for what you offered. Or perhaps the proposal itself requires substantial improvement. Each of these possibilities can be investigated, but none logically requires the conclusion that you as a person are a failure. This is also where the contrast between the ACC and PCC becomes useful. After experiencing rejection or disappointment, ask yourself two different questions. What does this experience teach me about my strategy? And what am I telling myself this experience means about me? The first question helps you examine evidence and determine whether something needs to be adjusted. The second helps you recognize the personal narrative you may be constructing around the experience. Nadia, learn from the temporary outcome can provide valuable information about what you did, how you communicated, what you offered, or what you may need to improve. It should not automatically become a permanent declaration of who you are. Use the experience as information, make the necessary adjustments, and continue moving as long as the idea remains worthwhile. Taryn questions, D.R.S. Hakim, does persistence mean that I should keep working even when I am mentally exhausted? Tim, thank you for this important question. The answer is no. Persistence does not mean treating appropriate recovery as a weakness. There is an important difference between resting so that you can continue and avoiding responsibility because you do not feel like continuing. Sustainable persistence requires enough self-awareness to recognize that distinction. If exhaustion is causing serious errors, impaired judgment, poor communication, or declining performance, simply adding more working hours may not produce additional value. A disciplined person should be capable of recognizing when appropriate recovery is necessary so that responsibilities can later be resumed effectively. However, recovery should also have boundaries. Rest should restore purposeful activity rather than quietly becoming indefinite avoidance. Persistence is not measured by how exhausted you can make yourself. It is measured by your ability to sustain purposeful effort over time. Sometimes persistence means continuing through temporary discomfort because the task simply requires discipline. At other times, persistence means recognizing that your ability to continue tomorrow depends upon responsible recovery today. Wisdom is knowing the difference. Tane, if the method you are using to pursue an idea repeatedly destroys your ability to continue pursuing that idea responsibly, then the method itself deserves examination. Sustainable success requires more than intense effort for a short period. It requires the ability to continue functioning effectively over the time necessary to accomplish the objective. As we conclude today's wealth lesson, remember the central principle contained within our title, persistence equals success. This does not mean that persistence alone guarantees every particular outcome we desire. Success requires knowledge, judgment, preparation, discipline, appropriate opportunity, adaptation, and sometimes circumstances beyond our control. What this principle emphasizes is that worthwhile achievement generally cannot be sustained without the ability to continue when progress becomes difficult. If every setback causes us to stop, every delay causes us to lose confidence, and every rejection causes us to abandon the objective, our abilities may never remain engaged long enough to produce their fullest results. Persistence does not mean doing the same thing forever. It means refusing to surrender a worthwhile objective merely because advancement requires patience, learning, correction, and disciplined effort. There will be periods when progress appears rapid and periods when very little seems to be happening. There will be successes, disappointments, corrections, delays, and circumstances you could not have anticipated when you began. Do not allow every difficulty to become a command to stop. Instead, ask what the difficulty is teaching you. Respect the evidence, preserve what works, correct what does not, and continue when continuation remains wise. Remember, do not simply repeat yesterday's behavior and call it persistence. Examine what your experience has taught you, identify what needs improvement, make the necessary adjustments, and continue with discipline. If the strategy is working but slowly, remain patient and consistent. If the evidence demonstrates that the strategy needs modification, make the modification. The objective is not merely to keep moving, it is to keep moving intelligently towards something worthwhile. If today's lesson has benefited you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this lesson with your family members, friends, colleagues, and loved ones. Someone you know may currently be considering abandoning a worthwhile objective because progress has become difficult. Sharing this lesson may help that person examine the situation differently. If you have a question you would like considered for an upcoming wealth lesson, please send it to the email address provided in the description below, or leave your question in the comments section. Your question may address something being experienced by many other people around the world, and the answer may benefit individuals far beyond your own circumstances. Most importantly, do not merely listen to these lessons. Apply the principles. Continue developing your behavior, strengthening your discipline, examining your thinking, learning from evidence, adapting when necessary, and moving toward worthwhile objectives with patience and sound judgment. Until then, live long, maintain high standards, perform the best deeds, and continue to prosper.
Thank you for watching. We hope today's lesson has encouraged you to apply these timeless wealth-building principles in your own life. To gain a broader understanding of the principles we've discussed throughout this series, we encourage you to invest in your future transformation by securing a copy of each of D.R.S. Hakim's wealth-empowering and transformative manuscripts. Visit our online bookstore at retrainyourbrainforsuccess.com. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell for upcoming videos, comment and share. There is much more to discover, and we look forward to seeing you in our next exciting wealth lesson. And remember, as D.R.S. Hakim has often stated, procrastination is the enemy of success.